Well, good afternoon or morning or whenever it is that you're watching this. This is a webinar that actually a recording at this point that whose purpose is to um, show you, give you some background and give you an overview of the. Hello, Jennifer. Welcome to the webinar. Glad to have you. Um, so let me just start over. So this webinar this afternoon is to give you an overview of the new Utah Model Principal Evaluation System that we just completed work on just in the last month or so. Once again, this is a model evaluation system. This is not something that all districts are expected to use. It is done because of what state law reads and what board rule reads about creating a model evaluation system. We've created this system so that it can help those districts that don't have the capacity or the finances to purchase or create a principal evaluation system of their own. This is also just a principal evaluation system. It's not meant to evaluate district office administrators, although it can be used for that with some modifications. There are some districts that have created district administrator evaluation systems. I don't think that we are intending to do that from our office, although I don't know whether that's going to happen in the future with our emphasis on leadership that we now have. It's possible. But those districts that already have district office administrator evaluation systems, two that I know of, are Salt Lake City School District. And if you contact Logan Hall, who is the person there who is in charge of evaluation, he has recently completed work on a district office administrator evaluation system. So Logan would have some information and some helps and perhaps would even be willing to share his entire system with you. Davis School District also has a system that they have created. The contact person there is Suzanne Cottrell at the Davis District Office, and you can find all of their information by Googling Evaluate Davis. Their system is based on a 4-point kind of system, but it aligns very carefully with the Utah Educational Leadership Standards and with the Utah Effective Teaching Standards. One thing that's interesting about Davis's system as well is that they even have an evaluation system for superintendents that may be of interest to many superintendents out there, whose evaluations are quite often just based on conversations with the board. That while that may be perfect for a lot of you, a more robust evaluation system with opportunities for personal growth may be more your style or more what you want to do with evaluation with superintendents. So that's the preamble. Let me dive into what we're going to be doing today. First of all, this new evaluation system, the model evaluation system, is online, and I want to show you how to get to it. So I am going to share my screen with you. I'm going to share this particular screen, and then I'm going to show you how to get there. So if you go to the Utah State Board of Education website, which is schools.utah.gov, and if you then go to schools and educators, which is one of the buttons that are there, if you click on that, then you can click on educator effectiveness, which is on the left-hand side. You can see that highlighted on the screen. So you click on that. And then after you get to educator effectiveness, which you can see down about halfway down the page. Then if you scroll down, you can see, first of all, the effective teaching and learning standards, and that is where you find the Utah State Standards for Educational Leadership. That's where those reside, and those are the standards that were adopted by the board in May of 2018. So that's one document that is part of this system of model principal evaluation. But then if you go down a little bit further, you see evaluations. And first of all, you can see there's educator professional performance, and there are three items there. The first is the Utah Model Principal Evaluation System handbook, which has information on what the principal evaluation system is supposed to do, and some information on how to administer the evaluation system. And we're going to go through all of that during this webinar today. So we'll look at all of those pieces as much as is possible. And then right underneath that are the Utah the Utah Model Principal Evaluation System rubrics, which we are also going to be looking at today. What you might want to do is just click on those so that you can download them and have them available so that you can take a stronger look at them down the line. And I would, of course, recommend that you save them on your own computer so that you don't have to go looking for them every time you need them. All right. So that's where you find the things that those two things, those three things actually, the handbook, the rubric, and the standards, the three things that you really are going to want to look for. So we're going to go back to our PowerPoint, and I'm going to start the PowerPoint, and we're going to dive into this. If you have any questions, you can just put them in the chat screen. I've got that open now on my screen. You can put questions in there, or if you just want to turn on your microphone, you can ask questions in that way as well. And please don't hesitate to do that. This recording is going to be put on our website so that it's available to everyone out there. So I've actually already one slide in. So like I said, this is the Utah Model Principal Evaluation System. This is an overview of that system. The authority to do the system comes from board rule, you can see it there, R277531, and that's paragraph 4 and number 1, the number 1 item underneath that, which says what you see it says there, that we're supposed to develop a model educator evaluation system. And we did that for teachers a long time ago. The people who were here before me never did get around to creating a model principal or administrator evaluation system. There was one online that was created by Steve Diamond from the Canyon School District, and we're very grateful for Steve's work on that. Steve is now the Human Resources Director in Canyon School District, but that was the only one available. I want to just say that you are not required in your school districts to use this system. You can use the system. You can modify the system, adapt the system to make it work better for your circumstances. You can use a system that has been created by another school district. You can use a system that is modified from another school district. You can purchase a system from one of many places that have administrator evaluation systems available. Any of those things, of course, are absolutely fine. The one caveat that you always have to keep in mind is that the system has to be aligned to the Utah standards for educational leadership. It has to be aligned to those. Now, in some ways, that's not too difficult because the Utah the standards that we have, the educational leadership standards, are aligned to the PSEL standards, the professional standards for educational leadership, which were created by a coalition of educational leadership groups around the country. They included people from higher education, from the principals associations, from industry, from many different groups, and are a very comprehensive set of standards. Our standards are not exactly the same as the PSEL standards. They're based on the PSEL standards and our previous standards. But if you find an evaluation system that's based on the PSEL standards that makes sense to you, then chances are it's going to be aligned to our system. The one thing that would have to happen is that someone from our office would have to come and see your system and verify that it is aligned to our system. All right? So that's the purpose and the authority of why we can do what we've done and why we've done it. We weren't planning on creating an administrator evaluation system. We weren't planning on doing that. But some of the smaller school districts, especially some of the rural school districts, said, well, we don't have any money to do anything with that. We don't know what to do with that. Can you please help us out? So we went back and looked at the law. It tells us we develop a model system, and so we did. So let's move on now and start taking a look at what it's all about. So there are three components of this system. So the first component of the system is the Utah Standards for Educational Leadership. And we've already looked at that. We've already taken that. The standards are organized. Let me see. I think the next slide talks about that. Come on, let's move on. No, it actually doesn't. So let me go back. So the standards are organized into strands and standards, which is different from the way that we used to look at standards. We would have standards and objectives. Our school board a few years ago decided they wanted to have all of our standards have the same structure. So now the way that we're looking at them is that they have strands and then they have standards underneath those strands. Let me just quickly open up. I can just close this for just a second. And I'm going to open up. Oh, you don't need to see my hotel bill. Let me get rid of that. I'm just going to quickly open up the standards and just show you how they're organized. You've probably looked at them already, but just in case you haven't, let me just bring this up really fast. So this is what the cover looks like of the Utah State Standards for Educational Leadership. And if I go down to strand 1 right here, which is about visionary leadership, you can see that we have a strand right here. There's a strand. And then underneath that strand, there is a strand description. This is really the objective of visionary leadership. This is what we're looking for. We want our effective educational leaders to be able to facilitate the development, articulation, implementation, and stewardship of a shared vision that promotes each student academic success and well-being. And then underneath that, we have 5 standards that help us get to that strand statement. So each one of these standards breaks it down a little bit more about collaborating with faculty, staff, parents, and the community, school community to develop that system, that vision, using data to get to that vision, creating plans that include short and long-term goals, to developing a shared understanding and commitment to the vision within the school and community, and then monitoring and evaluating progress and revising plans. So that would be a school improvement plan. So that's the way that that looks. The way that we've organized the evaluation system, and now I'm going to get back to that, The way we've organized the evaluation system is that the strands are the important part of the system. And for summative evaluations, we are evaluating at the strand level rather than at the standard level. We're evaluating at the strand level. Well, let me show you how that would look. So this is our this is the first set. This is the first strand along with its standards that go underneath it. So some design principles that go along with this, we're going to talk about those in just a minute, but this is the second component. The first component is the standards. The second component is the rubric. Each strand has a rubric that relates to the standards. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. The third component is there is a Utah Model Principle Evaluation System Handbook that is also available on that page that we talked about earlier. What that does is it describes the reasons why we've done what we've done, what the principles are that we've followed. It talks about how to do the three different parts of administrator evaluation, those three parts being leadership practice, which is the performance score that is required in state law and board rule. The second is student academic success, academic growth measures, and the third is stakeholder input. And we're going to get to all of those. So now we're going to take these three components and we're going to break them down to take a look at what we do. So first thing we're going to look at is these core design principles. So it's based on the Utah Educational Leadership Standards. It's built on 5 core design principles. The 5th principle has to do with the needed expertise of those who are doing evaluations. We're not going to talk a lot about that. It talks about that in the handbook, and so it just lets you know that those who do those evaluations have to be extremely familiar with what's going on in the school and have many opportunities to be in and around the principals and be working with them in order to do this evaluation. So that's the 5th design principle. Let's look at the other design principles. So the first one is, you know what? I don't have them here. You have to go and look at those. I'm sorry. We have to go look at those in the handbook. Gosh, I can't hang on for just a second. Okay, here they are. I'm sorry. These are the core design principles. Let me just go back here real fast. So, first of all, one of the core design principles is that the evaluation system has to contain the 3 components that are required in state code and board rule. And those 3 components are leadership practice, which is the performance score, and that includes, by the way, effectiveness in evaluating employee performance. That was one of the caveats that was put into board rule. This is R277533, that principals are to be evaluated on their ability to evaluate performance, educator performance. And that is built into the rubrics in a couple of different places. So leadership practice includes that. The second one, as I just talked about, is student academic growth. And the third one is stakeholder input. So when the system was designed, we took into account those 3 parts that are required by law. The second core principle was that it has 2 portions to it. It's in nature, it has 2 purposes. And the first purpose, in all actuality, is more important than the second purpose, although the second purpose is important. But the first purpose is that it ensures that principals are continually improving their skills and becoming more and more effective. So that purpose of continuous improvement is accomplished as evaluators, as supervisors, meet with principals on a regular basis and are going through the standards, they're going through the system, and they're looking at what the principal is doing, and they're doing some coaching with that principal. We're going to talk about the dichotomy that we've always talked about between coaching and evaluating, if those two things are mutually exclusive. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first of all, let's talk about that second thing of ensuring that principals are of the highest quality. Of course, that has to be part of an evaluation system. We have to be able to say our principals are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Um, is there a conflict between part A, the continuous improvement, and part B, the evaluation function? And the answer to that question is no. That dichotomy actually ends up being a myth. It's not, there is not that kind of a conflict, with a couple of caveats. Number one, there has to be a personal relationship between the evaluator and the person being evaluated. The person who is evaluating has to set the stage that their purpose as an evaluator is to help the principal to become more effective in their practice. And then they have to show that in their actions. Um, a while ago, actually it was last June, we had a principal supervisor conference. And we had one of the lead authors, in fact, the lead author of the studies funded by the Wallace Foundation about changing the role of the principal supervisors. And unfortunately, her name has just escaped me, but I'll think of it in just a minute. Ellen Goldring, there it is. One thing that she talked about was that in their study, what they found is that administrator or supervisors who are coaches to their principals are actually better evaluators because they have a much better idea of what is actually happening in that school. They've seen it from day to day. They have much more to evaluate the principal on, and therefore their evaluations are more valid and they are accepted better because it's that continuous improvement kind of idea. The same thing that we're trying to do with teacher evaluations. So that's one of our design principles. We want our principals to be continuously improving their skills and becoming more effective. And then we also want to ensure high quality. And part of that ensuring high quality is the idea of finding those who are having difficulty in their practice and giving them appropriate interventions, and then also doing the HR function, which is to either retain or dismiss principals who simply cannot function. And so we want to find those people and make sure that they don't just continue in the system. So that is our second design principle. Actually, the third when we think about the quality of the evaluator. So the next core principle is this, that it is based on the state's performance levels. So we had to build in the fact that we have from not effective, which is a score of 0, to highly effective, which is a score of 3. The nice thing that we've been able to do with this system is we've been able to say, if you're highly effective, then you are a model for other people to emulate. That's basically what highly effective behavior looks like. You're so good that other people ought to be doing the same things that you're doing. So that's highly effective. And of course, that's defined into much smaller grain sizes than that. If you're effective, that leads to strong student learning. And effective means that you are doing a very, very sound, very nice, very effective job as a principal. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. It doesn't mean that you're not good if you aren't rated highly effective. Highly effective is going above and beyond what's expected of a principal. So effective, it's leading to strong student outcomes. You're doing a great job. If it's minimally effective, then that's performance that needs improvement. And then not effective, that's performance that cannot be allowed to continue. In the handbook, it further defines those four performance levels and gives you more information about how we look at what highly effective, effective, minimally effective, and not effective means. And so by sharing those with your principals, then they know what targets they're shooting for. And they also know that being rated highly effective is actually something that is not going to happen on a continual basis. It's really, really high performance, and there's nothing wrong with not being rated highly effective. It's not like an A. Anyway, I think I've said enough about that. So our next core design principle is one of, hang on, where's my cursor? There we go. Okay, is this. The way that the rubric is designed is that we don't have a rubric for every standard that are defined in the strands. There are simply too many standards for us to be able to create an evaluation system that allows us to have those conversations that lead to continuous improvement. So instead, we have combined standards. We have looked for high leverage kinds of actions that then are defined in the rubrics. Um, but the performance expectations that are in those rubrics are correlated to the standards, and those correlations are in the rubric so that we can see if we're looking at the first performance expectation under visionary leadership, we can see the standards that it's correlated to. Again, as I said before, summative measurement is at the strand level rather than at the performance expectation level. And I'll show you how that happens. And that formative assessment correlates to the standards that are highlighted in the performance expectations. So what it allows us to do is to look at a performance expectation in a formative sense and say, here are the standards that this relates to. And then we will have some links for you that that will be linked to professional development activities and materials that will help principals who are at a minimal level or a not effective level, that will help them to improve their performance. So that's where that correlation to the standards come in. So the standards are very important, but we're not evaluating every single standard when it comes to summative evaluation. We're looking at them formatively. I hope that makes sense. All right, I'm just going to move a couple things around here for just a second so I can see some things. All right, so moving right along then. Let's take a look at how the rubrics are organized. First, before I move on, are there any questions about those core design principles? If there are, you can type them in the chat area, or you can just unmute your microphone and just ask your question. Okay, I'm going to move on. If there are ever any questions, just let me know. So let's look at how the rubric is organized, because that's what we're going to be looking at now is the first part of principal evaluation, which is leadership practice, or the performance part of evaluation. So here is what that rubric looks like right here. So the rubric in this case is visionary leadership, And I'm going to show you what the separate parts of that rubric look like. So the first thing that we have is up here at the top, where that circle is. What we have there is the strand name and description. So that's what we're measuring. So if we're looking at that strand name, which is the strand one is visionary leadership, the expectation is that effective educational leaders facilitate the development, articulation, implementation, and stewardship of a shared vision that promotes each student's academic success and well-being. That's what we're looking for. So how do we get there? How do we determine whether a principal is actually meeting that expectation of visionary leadership? Well, we have a set of performance expectations in the form of 3 sets of rubrics. So the first line is one performance expectation, which has to do with has to do with the development of the school mission, of collaborating with faculty and staff and sharing responsibility. The second one has to do with using data in order to do that and different levels of looking at that. And then the last one has to do with the actions that a principal takes in order to ensure that stakeholders are fully engaged in the process and are fully engaged in um, in in making the vision happen in the school. All right. So that's the next part, is those performance expectations. Next, we have across the top, we have the performance levels. Now you'll notice that on this rubric, on the performance levels, we only have 3 of the 4. We have minimally effective, we have effective, and we have highly effective. What we have chosen to say is that if a principal doesn't reach the expectations for minimally effective, then they are not effective. So therefore, we don't have any descriptors for not effective. We may find out sometime down the road that we need to have those descriptors for minimally effective, but we were copying what we've done in the Utah Teaching Observation Tool, where there is not a column for not effective, and it seems to have worked fairly well. So we'll just have to see. This is a dynamic document. We're going to be making changes as time goes on. So if that's something we find out we need, then we will certainly put that in. So we've got the strand name, we've got the performance expectations, we've got the performance levels. The next thing that we have is possible evidence. So these are evidences that could be used by an administrator, by an evaluator, as a way of determining what level of performance this principal is reaching on this particular strand, on these particular performance expectations, excuse me. So those are some things that they might be able to use. They also might be able to do some direct observation. They may be able to be in the meetings when the vision of the school is being developed. They might be able to attend school community councils when they're getting information from them or presenting data. So there might be some direct observation that can be done there, but also there are other ways of doing that. Then the last thing we have is, possible sources of evidence over there. Then the last thing we have is the standard correlation. So what this is showing us is that the performance expectation that is on the first line correlates to standards 1.1 and 1.4. The next one down correlates to standards 1.2 and 1.3. And the next one down correlates to standards 1.4 and 1.5. Now, the way we would use those is this. If someone is minimally effective and we believe that we need to put them on a plan, an assistance plan, or if someone is not even reaching minimally effective, and we know that their performance absolutely has to change, or we may have to dismiss them. Um, that tells us where we should go in order to help this principle. So we would look at standards 1.1 and 1.4, and I'm going to show you some places where you can pick up some helps for that. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. So these are standards correlations. So I'm just going to leave the PowerPoint here for just a second, and I'm going to go back to the website, and these are the standards. So those are the standards that we were looking at. So if we were looking at performance expectation on the first line, performance expectation 1, that has to do with collaborating with faculty, staff, parents, and the school community to develop a shared mission. If we were looking at the second one, that has to do with standards 1.2 and 1.3, which is collecting, analyzing, and using data. Well, where can we find some information about how we can give professional development or professional learning to that principle? Well, there are a couple of ways to do that. Let me show you what a couple of those ways are. So first of all, we're in the process of developing a school leadership web page on the USOE website and the USBE website. So if I go to schools.utah.gov and I do slash and then I do school leadership, we have oh, wait a minute. I did it wrong. What did I do wrong? Oh, I didn't do schools. There we go. Real-time mistakes using a growth mindset here. So we have a school leadership website, web page. So right now it's just kind of bare bones, but as this grows, we will have a section for teacher leaders, we'll have a section for principals, we'll have a second section for district leaders, and we'll have a way to get in contact with the people who are in charge of leadership in the State Board of Education. Um, so that will be one place to go. Now, when this is up and going, it will have links to the standards, to the evaluation system. It'll also have links to professional learning, ways of doing that, to some modules that can help a principal, to some other things. But one thing that already exists that we're feeling really good about is that McKill Withers, who used to be the superintendent of Salt Lake City School District, was hired not too long ago to be in charge of ULead. Now, ULead is something that you can find on our main page, and it's right here. It's one of those buttons. And if you click on that button, ULead stands for Utah Leading Through Effective, Actionable, and Dynamic Education. So one of the charges that McKill had was to collect resources that could be used for professional learning, for understanding more about particular things. So he's already started working on some of those. We have a contract with Hanover Research, and they do a lot of research for us, and then they create reports. So in this clearinghouse and resources part, right now we have, let's see, oh yeah, here we have it. Right now we have some innovative and effective practice reports. Those are basically the only things that are there so far. And in those practice reports, there are these leadership toolkits that are about all 7 of our Utah effective principal standards. And if we were looking for some helps for visionary leadership, we might click on this link, which would take us to this toolkit that talks about practicing visionary leadership. And as we scroll down, we can see that in the table of contents, there's an area that talks about leveraging available data to make decisions. So we click on that, and that would take us to this area that talks about what kinds of data are available, how can you get at that data, how can you interpret the data, how can you use the data to make decisions, and so on and so forth. So those things are going to be helpful in helping principals to get some professional learning. There'll also be some links to some books and to some courses, some online courses, to some websites. We're going to be curating all of that on that educational leadership website. So let's get back to the PowerPoint, and we can now move on. So those are the big picture. Those are the parts of the rubric that we use to help principals grow. So let me get that launched again. And I guess we're going to have to go through all of these things very quickly. Just a quick review of performance levels and evidence and standards correlations. So what do we do with that information once we've got it? So what we did was we created a way of looking at how to come up with a score for each strand. So some of our strands have 4 performance expectations. Some of them have 3 performance expectations. On the ones that have 4 performance expectations, if a principal is going to be marked highly effective, they have to be highly effective on at least 3 performance expectations. That says indicators. We're going to change that. And there has to be no rating below effective on any indicator. So in other words, they have to have 3 out of 4 that are highly effective, and the other one can't be below effective in order for them to be highly effective. In order to be effective, they have to be at least effective on 3, and there has to be no rating below marginally effective. So they can have 3 effective and 1 marginally effective, or 3 effective and 1 highly effective, but they can't have 3 effective and 1 not effective and be marked effective. They would be marked as marginally effective. So marginally effective says that they're at least marginally effective on at least 3 indicators, on 3 performance expectations. Now, one of those performance expectations could be marked highly effective, or it could be effective, or it could be not effective. But if 3 of them are marked at least marginally effective, then that person is marginally effective. So let's say that they have 2 that are marginally effective and 2 that are effective. Well, they'd be marginally effective, because in order to be marked effective, they have to have 3 performance expectations that are marked effective. Not effective, they're marked not effective on at least 2 indicators. If that's the case, then they are not effective, and therefore they have performance that cannot be allowed to continue. You can see the same kind of thing for those with 3 performance indicators. So that's the way you score the strands. Well, then in order to get to the overall rating for the entire leadership practice component, the performance component, this is what you would do. So you would then take those scores from the strands, and you would say, if this principal is highly effective, they have to be highly effective on at least 5 strands. They can't have any rating below effective. If they're effective on 5 strands. They have no rating below marginally effective. If they're marginally effective, they're at least marginally effective on at least 5 strands. And if they are not effective, then they are not effective on at least 4 strands. Now that math may not work out all the way, we're not sure, We may find out that our math doesn't quite work out. And if that's the case, we will make adjustments. But at this point, that's the way we're looking at it. So a principal then who is effective has 5 strands that they are highly effective on, that they're effective on. And let's say they have one that's marginally effective and one that's highly effective. They would be marked as effective for the entire leadership practice component. All right. So that's the way that works. Are there any questions or thoughts about anything so far? Sorry, I'm going to take a drink because my throat's getting kind of dry. One thing that I do want to point out is that this year, what we're really looking at is any districts that are going to use this for the rest of this school year. It's kind of a pilot year, kind of a validation year, and we're going to be working through some kinks because we know that there are some, and we'll make adjustments and modifications during the summer so that the system is up and ready to go by next year. And then when we run it next year, at the end of the year, we'll be doing a validation study to ensure that it does give us valid results. So let's go from there. Okay. So I don't see any questions or any thoughts. So I'm just going to move on. So one of the things that we thought about, and this is something that's being done in other states, and has been done in some of our school districts for educator evaluation. So we're proposing that you may want to think about, and this is not necessary, you may want to think about using what we're calling a 3-cubed rating system. So what that basically says is, most LEAs, we have principals who are being summatively evaluated once every 3 years. We know they're getting a formative evaluation in the other 2 years, but they're having a summative evaluation once every 3 years. So during that 3-year cycle, here's what we might do. So in year 1, we would do a formative evaluation on 2 strands. So say, for example, we may want to do teaching and learning and school management for learning. And then, but we would also include the school improvement strand because that is one of the high leverage strands. So we're going to look at that every year. So that makes 3 strands. Since the school improvement strand is critical, we do that all 3 years. The next year, we would choose 2 different strands, say ethics and ethical behavior and equity in education. We would choose those 2 and the school improvement plan. And then in the 3rd year, we would do the 2 strands that hadn't been done yet, plus the school improvement strand. So by the end of the 3rd year, the principal will have been evaluated and coached through all 7 strands, and with a special emphasis on that school improvement strand. Now, what is the purpose of that? The purpose of that is to have better conversations with principals and to focus on different areas of principal practice during the course of each year so that you can have more substantive conversations and better professional growth, continuous growth. We know from research that if people are working on more than 3 goals during the course of the year, they tend to get confused and sidelined, and they just don't ever make the progress that they ought to make. So we're suggesting that you work on 3 strands as their 3 goals for that year, and then you would have the opportunity of having focus, of having conversations, of having joint observations, of looking at the evidence for all of those things, and then being able to do that in smaller chunks. And then that summative evaluation in the 3rd year would consist of whatever the scores were for the 3 standards from this year and this year and this year, with the school improvement strand being averaged over the 3 years, or looking at the school improvement strand in the 3rd year as you've seen improvement over the course of the years. So that's just a suggestion, but it's just one way to look at it. So it gives you a better way of dealing with all of the strands and all of the standards. So let's look now at the next part of the evaluation system, which is academic growth measures. So here are some considerations, some things that we really looked at when we were trying to design this part of evaluation. This isn't something we've looked at with administrators before, other than saying that, we're going to look at the overall academic performance of your school. But it hasn't really been laid out in a very coherent way. So the first consideration that we came up with was, in state code, it says this, that an educator evaluation program may not use end-of-level assessment scores in educator evaluation. Now, you know that from teacher evaluation, but what a lot of us don't realize is that also refers to administrators. If you look at state law and board rule in terms of evaluation, administrators are classed as educators. There is no differentiation between a teacher and an administrator. So therefore, that same prohibition against using end-of-level assessment scores applies to administrators. We also know, by the way, if you look down to number 3, that Leithwood, and there are many others, this is Ken Leithwood from the University of Ontario, who worked with the province of Ontario on the Ontario Leadership Framework. His research says, and we know this, that an administrator affects student academic growth in indirect ways. A principal does not have direct influence on student academic growth. That's what teachers do. Administrators have indirect effects. So when we started looking at that in the model evaluation handbook, we listed many different ways of measuring a principal's influence on academic growth. So if we look at, let me see if I've still got that open down here. So let me just go away from this for a second, and let me see if I've still got the handbook open. Well, I can open it up here really fast. So let me do that, just a second. It'll be there in just a second. So, okay, so here's the handbook. So if we look at page 7 of this handbook, let's just go down there. And we are talking about academic growth right here. Then here are some examples of some measures that could be used to determine a score, an evaluation score for a principal on student academic growth. So some of those things might be the completion of academic growth goals set by principals in concert with their supervisors, showing the ultimate responsibility for overall academic growth. If a principal wants to use standardized test scores in determining their rating, they're able to do that. The district can't say they have to, but principals can choose to use that. We might want to look at the school improvement plan and what happens and what principal actions are happening from the principal affecting the teachers directly, which then impacts students indirectly. So we might want to look across the year at what's happening with the school improvement plan. We might want to use high leverage practices. For example, choosing leading indicators, things like measures of culture and allocation of resources and physical resources, human capital, and how we assign our teacher talent to students in ways that they benefit students the most. We might want to look at time spent in classrooms because that has been shown to have an effect. Focusing on continuous improvement cycles with teachers in their evaluations, leadership and attendance at and performance participation in PLCs, all of those things are things that have an indirect effect on student academic growth. So therefore, they could be part of a principal's evaluation in this area of academic growth measures. So how would we look at that? Well, one way to look at that would be in setting some student academic growth goals at the beginning of the year. That would be evidence-based and they would have no more than 3. They'd be approved and so by or set with the supervisor. There'd be a mid-year conference, at least. Monthly meetings are even better, and then an end-of-year conference and scoring. So here's just a little example of what that might look like. Whoops, I went too far. So here's a little example of what that might look like. So a principal might say, well, one of the things that I want to do, I don't think I'm spending enough time in classrooms, observing teachers and giving feedback to teachers. So my goal is that I want to spend at least 3 more hours per week observing teaching in classrooms than I do in my current practice. My current practice is 2 hours. And I'm going to give feedback to teachers after every visit. So then we would determine that the principal in concert with their supervisor would then determine what would be the rubric for that. What performance would constitute not effective? What would constitute minimally effective? What would constitute effective? What would constitute highly effective? Now, this isn't just something that the principal gets to say, here's what's going to affect this. This is something that is done between the principal and their supervisor. So not effective in this case might be, I didn't increase the amount of time I spent in the classrooms. So that was not effective. That's not going to help. Minimally effective, well, I maintain my current level of time in classrooms. Effective, well, I achieved my goal. I spent 5 hours in classrooms. I gave some feedback to the teachers on every visit. In highly effective, in order for me as the principal to be rated as highly effective, I think what I need to do, and my supervisor agrees, that in addition to what it says in effective, I'm going to have professional conversations with teachers after every observation that lead to teacher goals for growth. So professional conversations are something that is different than just giving some little bit of feedback to the teachers. It's more like of a post-conference, but it's not as formal and it's not as long. There's a great book that's put out by Charlotte Danielson that's called Talk About Teaching. That is subtitled Professional Conversations that help teachers grow. And that might be something you might want to read with your principals. Or if they choose this kind of a goal, you might say, well, in order for you to really know what professional conversations look like, here's the book that you need to read. If you don't want to go for the whole book, there's also an article in ASCD that was also done by Charlotte Danielson that is called Evaluations that help teachers grow. So that might be something that you want to do. All right. So that's just an example of what that kind of goal might look like. There are many different ways of doing that. So any questions on academic growth measures? Did someone just join us or just leave us? Let's see. Oh, I guess not. Okay. Any questions? Oh yeah, Jennifer just left. Okay, well, I'm going to continue. So here's the last part of this. The last part of this is The last part of this uh, is the idea of stakeholder input. So what are some considerations for stakeholder input? That's the third part. So stakeholder input is gathered for administrators. They have to gather it from parents and teachers, from parents, just as teachers do. They also have to gather it from teachers. They also have to gather it from students when that's appropriate, um, which also teachers may do, but you have to get it from all three, parents, teachers, students, if the students are able to give that kind of feedback. Other stakeholders like school support staff can provide feedback. And also LEAs can choose from many different means of collecting that stakeholder input. So means might include some surveys that are available commercially or online, such as student surveys, teacher surveys, parent surveys, school climate surveys. You might want to require your principals to keep logs of interaction with community members, telephone logs, or some artifacts of communication with stakeholders like emails, texts, official correspondence. Whatever way helps you to determine a rating on stakeholder input. So in order to evaluate that, we would look at the results would emphasize how principals used data gathered from stakeholder input to improve their practice. So the ratings could be determined by using this suggested rubric. This isn't one that is set in stone if you wanted to alter it in some way, but it's descriptive of what the different levels might look like. So that's stakeholder input. So really, that's the end of our conversation here. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. Um, if you have questions or concerns about the evaluation system, contact Lisa Young, who is the Educational Leadership Specialist at the Utah State Board of Education. And you can see her email there. She can help you with those questions. Again, all of the materials are online. The materials for the handbook, for the rubrics, the standards are all online. Those leadership toolkits that come from ULead are available to help principals with professional development. And we will be populating the school leadership website with more links in the future. So once again, I'm David Smith. It's been my privilege to be the educational leadership specialist for the state of Utah for the past little over 3 years. I'm leaving the office. So Lisa is the person who you should contact for any kinds of questions. Thank you for listening. I hope that this has been helpful. Any questions, please contact Lisa. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then I am going to stop the recording. And thank you all very much.